A warm spring sun rose over the eternal city. Morning business stirred in the post-Civil War world as the city slowly came alive. In the Temple of Saturn, 2 praefecti aerarii, chosen by Augustus, managed the imperial treasury. To their right, a corridor led to the reserve treasury, which housed the spoils of Augustus's conquests. Nearby, the newly established military treasury, which had been bolstered by Augustus's own endowments of 170 million sesterces, supported the rapidly demobilizing Roman army. After years of civil unrest, the treasuries were stable once more, and taxation could begin again. While the highlights of history no doubt consist of epic clashes between armies and great generals, the truth is that the fate of the greatest empires of the past were determined less by this and more by the mundane yet crucial regulation and collection of currency. Welcome to our video on taxation in the Roman Empire, where we will explore the sophisticated bureaucracy of the imperial and examine how it greased the wheels which kept Roman society turning.
Every week we release 3 new exclusive videos for our members and patrons. The Pacific War, the Eastern Front of World War II Prelude, and many other series, including the War of Spanish Succession, Punic Wars, Iberian Reconquista, Russian Revolution and Civil War, North African and Italian campaigns of World War II, and much more. It has been long overdue, but we have finally created a YouTube channel exclusively for our Kings and Generals podcasts. Please go and check out Kings and Generals podcast, home to the Pacific War Week by Week podcast and the Fall and Rise of China podcast, link in the description and pinned comment. To see those, as well as get access to our exclusive Discord, see our schedule, and get early access to all videos, join the ranks of our patrons and YouTube members via the links in the description and pinned comment. Thanks to our supporters for allowing us to continue doing our dream job.
Romans were notorious for their taxes, and they were not afraid of whom to tax, what to tax, and where to enforce them. In the provinces, taxes were used situationally, at the discretion of provincial governors, on individuals and companies alike. On the march, taxes were utilized as a peace offering, with conquered cities and peoples being given a choice between accepting Roman subjugation or maintaining their autonomy while paying taxes to Rome. During the Republic, they remained much as they were when they were laid out. Under Augustus, they received sweeping reforms. Throughout the empire, taxes were periodically reviewed and updated to suit the needs of a struggling empire. Roman taxation was non-uniform, capable of adapting to the local conditions and traditions of the many regions the empire conquered. This, along with the practices of adopting local deities, existing infrastructure, and the installation of native magistracies, helped Rome hold power over its vast sprawl of provinces. Let us begin our exploration of the Roman taxation system with its most ubiquitous form, the property tax. The property tax, or the tributum soli, was the first form of tax that the Roman state apparatus actively farmed for revenue. Stemming from the early Republic, it was regarded as the most important tax in the Roman economy. Framed as contracts, the property tax coincided with the census that set the property values every 5 years. These contracts also specified how the payments were to be made, the rate of the tax, and the farmers' profits, which usually lay between 6 and 10%. This source of income also became the first point of investment for the noble families of Rome. After Rome's victory over Macedonia in 148 BC, which ended the fourth and final war against Alexander's descendants, the Senate took advantage of the spoils of war and eliminated the property taxes in Italy, where rich senators owned most of their property. This abolishment further aggravated the growing civil unrest in Rome over the distribution of land and the domination of the wealthy. The Gracchi brothers, Tiberius and Gaius, aimed to change these wealth disparities in 132 and 123 BC respectively. Though they themselves met grisly fates, their laws effectively redistributed some of the land back to the hands of Roman citizens. Let us now move on from property to another pillar of Roman society, marriage. Marriage taxes in ancient Rome were implemented primarily under Augustus, emperor between 27 BC and 14 AD, in the form of two laws. The first of these laws, ratified in 18 BC, was known as the Lex Julia de Maritandis Ordinibus, or the Julian Law, on the marrying of the social orders. This law mandated marriage and childbearing for men between the ages of 25 and 60, and women between 20 and 50. Those who were not married could not receive inheritances or legacies except from relatives within 6 degrees of kinship. Married couples who did not have children under this law could not leave more than 1% of their property to each other in their will. Additionally, those who did have children received greater privileges, such as a preference for government offices. This law also banned marriage between senators, including children and grandchildren, and former slaves. Male adultery was also made a public crime, punishable by relegation and loss of property. The second law, introduced in 9 AD, was the Lex Papia Poppaea, or the Poppaean Law, which further tightened the laws of 18 BC, including provisions against celibacy and adultery. Despite the seemingly harsh factors of these laws, they were primarily aimed at the upper classes, whom Augustus felt had debauched themselves for long enough. The Greek-born Roman senator Cassius Dio wrote that the laws were relatively easy to evade, and concessions were routinely handed out. Emperor Trajan, ruling from 98 to 117 AD, pardoned his magistrate, Pliny the Younger, from the inheritance penalties that childlessness brought under the Augustan laws. Pliny was granted the ius liberorum, which was the right of children, giving the recipient the same rights as a person with 3 children. Pliny's wife sadly had 2 miscarriages and was grateful for Trajan's pardon. The implications of inheritance also played an important role in marriage taxes and property taxes that preceded it. This would have been particularly important for widowers over 60 and widows over 50, who were encouraged to marry again to preserve family fortunes. It is clear inheritance played an important role in Roman society, as many elites relied on their inheritances to give them a foot forward once it was received. Compared to the property laws of the empire, this tax generated a negligible amount of revenue, but it was evident that Rome left no stone unturned on sources of income. It should come as no surprise to anyone familiar with Rome's track record that much of its taxation apparatus existed to fund its massive military. Following the intense series of civil wars of the late Republic, the Roman treasury was severely depleted and desperate for funding. At the end of his campaigns, Augustus's army totaled approximately 60 legions, which equated to around 300,000 soldiers, not including auxiliaries and support troops. If not managed efficiently, he ran the risk of another civil war breaking out. To combat any discontent, he reduced the number of legions to 28 and settled the remaining veterans in colonies in Italy and abroad, paying out 150 million denarii and 260 million denarii, respectively, to achieve these measures. From around 6 AD, the aerarium militare, or military treasury, had been established with 170 million sesterces of Augustus's own money in an effort to secure the veterans' loyalty. This treasury drew funds from the new taxes on inheritance and auction sales, which Augustus titled the Vicesima Hereditatum, and was placed at 5%. The reign of Emperor Augustus also saw large reforms in taxation on trade, sales, and tolls. The foremost of these was the portoria, or the customs and tolls tax. These were levied on all goods entering or leaving the empire, whether through Egypt or Palmyra in the east, or Gaul to Britain in the west, as well as between the provinces. The rates on these taxes typically existed between 2 and 5%. The regulations managing these could be excessively complicated. Import and export taxes in Palmyra, for example, specified the duties owed on long lists of specific products, and required higher duties on exports compared to identical imported goods. Sales taxes are attested in the Roman province of Judea, documented in at least 6 AD. Instead of the standard taxation practices Rome implemented in recently annexed or conquered provinces, the Roman governor of Syria at the time, Vitellius, remitted the standard tax framework. Vitellius continued the city taxes instated by Herod the Great, king of Judea from 37 to 34 BCE, and client of Rome, which taxed all agricultural produce that came through the city. This tax generated sufficient income for the Romans that they didn't bother upsetting the local customs. Sales taxes were also implemented across the empire. Under Augustus, it was a standard 1%, while under Tiberius it was 0.5%. These sales taxes also applied to slaves. Augustus introduced a 4% tax on slave sales, which was originally placed on the purchaser. However, under Nero, the tax moved to the dealer, which naturally resulted in the dealers raising their prices. Unfortunately, aside from the numbers, it is not known how this tax was collected or monitored. In addition to this tax, slave owners paid the Vicesimal Libertatis, or the 20th for freedom, which was a 5% tax on the value of slaves when released from slavery. Poll taxes, or the Tributum Capitis, had been used throughout Rome's history during both the Republic and Empire. In the Republican period, they were primarily collected by private tax farmers known as publicani. The Romans used the census to update the registry of taxable citizens every 5 years, in addition to the updating of property values for tax purposes. Under Augustus, the responsibility of tax collection fell to provincial magistrates and senates of their cities. However, the tax was not introduced in the various provinces of the empire until the necessary census had been conducted. The first recorded census in Gaul was in 27 BC, almost 25 years after Gaul was conquered. Censuses in the provinces were a new phenomenon under Augustus and were put into effect gradually over many years. They were an effective way of assessing newly acquired territories. It is important to note that the poll tax fell on Roman subjects, not Roman citizens. Towns who possessed the ius Italicum were exempted from the poll tax. In 212 AD, Emperor Caracalla conferred citizenship on all residents of the provinces, but did not exempt them from the poll tax. Roman taxation didn't end there. Caligula, who served as emperor from 37 to 41 AD, introduced sweeping taxes on a smorgasbord of necessities. These included food and edibles, lawsuits, porters' wages, weddings or marriages, taverns, artisans, slaves, and prostitutes, whether active, retired, or married. These taxes continued to the reign of Severus Alexander in 235 AD, who abolished the deeply unpopular sales tax. Under Caligula, taxes were enforced by the aggressive Praetorian Guard instead of the professional tax farmers, the publicani. Reigning as emperor from 55 to 68 AD, Nero increased taxation during his reign to fund the rebuilding of Rome following the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. His successor, Vespasian, added taxes on vegetables and urine, which was a valuable commodity in the leather and textiles industry. The tax on urine drew displeasure from many. In one anecdote, it is said that Vespasian's son, the future Emperor Titus, held a coin from the first installment of urine tax to Vespasian's nose and asked him if it stank. This was the origin of the Latin proverb, "money does not stink." During his tenure from 96 to 98 AD, Emperor Nerva attempted to implement a string of economic reforms in an effort to gain support. To do this, he exempted the poorest families' parents and their children from the inheritance tax. He abolished the fiscus ludacius, which was a tax that all Jews in the empire had to pay. Under his successor, Emperor Trajan, the import tax sat at 25% on all levied goods entering the empire. Between 138 to 161 AD, Emperor Antonius Pius famously suspended taxes in cities affected by natural disasters, such as the earthquakes that affected Rhodes and the province of Asia, or the fires that engulfed Rome and Narbona. He additionally offered financial grants for rebuilding various Greek cities after two major earthquakes in 140 and 152 AD. Diocletian, emperor from 284 to 305 AD, reformed the tax system in its entirety. His new system was based on capita, heads, and jugere, land. One jugerum was equal to approximately 0.65 acres, and was used by the new census officials to calculate the combined value of landowners and labor for each city. It is important to note that the jugum was not a consistent measure of land, and varied according to the type of land, crops, and labor required. These taxes were due on the 1st of September each year, and levied by military decurions. Italy, which had long been exempt from taxation, was included in these reforms from 290 AD. However, the city of Rome itself remained exempt. Diocletian's reforms split the provinces into smaller segments gradually over many years, reducing the administrative load and increasing the number of available administrative positions. His reforms made the empire more efficient, since governors were now responsible for fewer cities. This resulted in greater and more accurate tax collection, and somewhat stabilized the ongoing crisis of the 3rd century. Taxation in ancient Rome was as indiscriminate in its subject as it was merciless in its collection. There are samples of the taxes the Romans utilized, and there likely were many more that they implemented, which have unfortunately been lost to the passage of time. The taxes discussed today were largely drawn from the Augustan era, when the largest administrative reform of the Republic occurred. It was only after the tumultuous period from the deaths of the Gracchi to Augustus's victory over Mark Antony that he was finally able to reform the administration of the res publica, which it so desperately needed. The result of this was the introduction or reintroduction of taxes that aimed at every level of Roman society. Throughout the empire, the administrative process of taxation was reviewed periodically by different emperors, some with success and others without. The expansion, wealth, and institutional success of Rome depended heavily on its taxation and its effective governance. More videos on the life and society of the ancient Romans are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly patron and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.